UN 2015 agenda. And for my students who are here, very much at the front of pushing the macroeconomic agenda, which is what we just talked about. So, very much in pushing those issues and some of the issues that we've spoken about. And so we're very excited, and thank you so much for all of you for taking the time to come here. We're excited, and so Kate, I'm going to let you take it.
Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting us here. We're really happy to get out of New York City for an afternoon. We've got part of our delegation here, and part of the delegation is going to an event at the UN today. And we thought this is a good opportunity, I guess, to reach out and try and talk to students about the work that the participants are doing. I'll just give you a bit of a brief on APWLD and why we're here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a model that we think is important for development called development justice. And then the members of our delegation are going to tell you about their situation, what they're doing here, the particular issues in their countries. So APWLD, as Radhika mentioned, is a feminist network across Asia Pacific. We have members in 25 countries of the region, 180 members, and we've been around for about 27 years. We're very much we see ourselves as a membership-driven network, so we're not we don't see ourselves as like an NGO or an INGO, not like some of the big groups that you might work with, but we do have pretty big outreach and impact because of our members and because we are membership driven, and our members play a very active role in all of our programs. So we have a range of programs which are set by the membership, and we have an overarching framework of trying to look at the structural issues that impede women's rights. And the way we think about that is we analyse the way that patriarchy fuses with militarism, fundamentalisms and globalisation. So that's the kind of framework that we're looking at, is how these things fuse together to undermine women's rights. And our work is to try and challenge and change that kind of paradigm through we have different kind of programs. So first of all, we try and look at capacity building. We think it's really important to build the capacity of women's movements across the region. So we have a range of capacity building programs. We try and contribute to knowledge. So we do research and also documentation and so forth, and build tools. So, different kind of publications, but also creative tools for campaigning. Then we focus a lot on advocacy, and advocacy to change, of course, systems, policies, laws, practices at the very local level, at the national level, regional and international. But all of that is done in a framework of movement building. So our main focus, I guess, all of this should add to a strong women's movement, a strong voice of women, and political power for women in the region. I won't go through all of the specific programs that we run, but they all operate in that kind of framework of how we believe change happens. So I'll talk a bit then about why we're engaged with this agenda. How do people really follow or know much about what the MDGs are, the Millennium Development Goals? You've covered that a bit? Great. Okay. So as you know, the Millennium Development Goals are expiring. We didn't think that the Millennium Development Goals were a particularly good way to look at development. They were very sort of focused on small targets that governments found easy and measurable. Not that they've reached them, but we didn't really think that this was a useful way of looking at human rights, and it didn't look at inequality. So we've been wanting to try and campaign with this post-2015 agenda to change the way that we think about development. We don't necessarily think that we're going to go in there and the UN's going to suddenly say, oh, we never thought of that, that there's all this inequality. But we think it's a really good opportunity to bring about a broader agenda that we have, which is to challenge the the inequalities, the wealth and power inequalities of the world, and be trying to make governments accountable for the choices that they make around development. And that's partly why we're engaged with this process. Here, we can't read it that well, but you'll see just a few statistics around, how is the world being organised right now. So I think the first one is that the richest 300 people in the world are more wealthy than the poorest 3 billion combined. Of course, quite a number of those 300 people are, in the US, people that you might be familiar with. And I mean, that is an obscene kind of statistic that we could imagine. And then we have a bit about how the distribution of public funds. So only 1% of the global military budget would allow every girl to go to school. For every $1 in aid that is currently spent, there's over $25 spent in debt repayments. So a lot of the global south, of course, have debt to international banks and also to other countries. And then some of the incredible injustices of the way that labour is valued and speculation and investment is valued. So just as an example, in 1 year, a Bangladeshi garment worker will make less in her entire year than one of the world's richest women makes in a single second. And we are also quite focused on issues of land, and we think that land right, the access and control over land is a much stronger indicator of poverty than dollars a day. It's really probably the most important indicator for control over one's life as well as poverty indicators. So there is extensive land grabbing and going on across the global south, and a lot of it's in Asia. And we'll have a discussion about that in a minute with some of the participants. Okay. So we're calling for a new model, and we're calling that development justice. You see, some of us, I've been cut out of the photo, but Annie is there. She's the E. This is out the front of the UN in Bangkok. In the way that the United Nations operates, they have regional commissions as well as their headquarters here, and we do a lot at that level in Bangkok in Thailand. Okay, so this new model that we are really trying here to promote is of development justice is we're going to be framed by 5 foundational shifts. Now the UN is talking about its foundational shifts as well. There's reports that have come out to try and inform this new development framework after the Millennium Development Goals, the post-2015, and they have 5 foundational shifts. Things like leave no one behind, sustainable economic growth, etc. And ours are a little different. So we're calling for redistributive justice, and this is one of the ones that they really miss out on, the fact that we can't have a development model that talks about the poor until we talk about the wealthy. So that's a fundamental issue that we need to look at redistribution. A lot of countries are saying there's no money, we can no longer distribute aid, etc. But we know there's money, we just know that it's in the hands of a tiny minority. So redistributive justice, and this is about between countries as well as between rich and poor and between men and women. Economic justice, I'll go through them a bit more actually. Something on each of them. Social justice, environmental justice, and accountability. Okay, so redistributive justice. This aims to redistribute resources, wealth, power, and opportunities to all human beings equitably, and it compels us to dismantle the existing systems that channel resources and wealth from developing countries to wealthy countries, from people to corporations and elites, and and it recognises people as sovereign of our local and global commons, so meaning that we as people should have power over our lands and environment, not corporations. Although I know that in the US, corporations are now people, so I have to make that caveat there. When we say people, we mean people that can breathe oxygen and expel carbon, not corporations, although they do take up a lot of carbon. Okay, so we'll talk about the picture, I think, in a minute. Economic justice, we're talking about how to reorganise economies. So we want economies that enable dignified lives, that accommodate for the needs and facilitate capabilities, so and that enable people to use the capabilities that they have to enjoy rights, to facilitate fair and just employment and livelihoods, and it's not based on an idea of exploitation, which our current economic system is very much based on maximum exploitation of labour, of resources, to see how much you can extract from people, how much you can extract from earth, in order to derive capital, but we're saying that in fact people put that at the centre of it, right, and rather than the reverse. And that model would allow for local economies to prosper, local small enterprises to prosper, which are the ones that women are mainly in control of. I'll just very quickly mention this photo. We have somebody in our delegation who's not here with us. She's going to the other event. She took this photo when she's part of the Garment Workers Solidarity Centre in Bangladesh. Have people heard about the collapse? Yeah. So she went into the building immediately, and she documented what went on there, and she took this photo of, which has become quite famous, of a couple that she found in the rubble. Together with more than 1,000 other workers, most of them are women. Now, social justice, of course, one of the things we need to recognise is that patriarchy does pre-exist globalisation. So we don't think that it's simple that development will be effective for women only to address the economic issues. We need to also address all of the underlying issues of gender inequality and patriarchy. So social justice has to be a clear part of the development agenda. In the previous development agenda, the Millennium Development Goals, there were gender indicators, but really didn't recognise throughout that how much poverty is gendered, how much militarisation is gendered, how much health is gendered, etc. So this social justice component really needs to focus on the enjoyment of human rights and recognise the need to, particularly to dismantle patriarchy and the fundamentalisms within the Asia Pacific that are really quite rife and in some places growing. And then environmental justice. I read recently a good speech by Naomi Klein. Does anybody read the work of Naomi Klein? Yeah, No Logo, and another book she wrote is called The Shock Doctrine. I recommend it to people. It's a fantastic book that really kind of politicises people if you read it. But she was talking about that for progressive movements that are interested in development and social justice, that we really need to think about the crisis of the environment as the one possible way of getting governments to understand the need to move to a different model. That if we really are focused on changing the macroeconomic framework that we have, maybe the best strategy is to do it from an environmental perspective. In Asia Pacific, we've got enormous, probably the most environmental disasters and climate-related disasters occur in our region. And some countries really now just have to prepare for it annually, like Bangladesh. It's a low-lying country where floods, in really displace millions of people. And then we have small island states as well that maybe Helen can talk about when she talks about the situation in Bougainville, where already people are being, have to vacate their lands and be relocated. So environmental justice really needs to be a clear part, and some governments are very reluctant about this because one of the principles of is that there has to be what we call common but differentiated responsibility. That means everybody's responsible for trying to create a sustainable world, but some governments and countries have to do their fair share for the amount that they've already contributed to the environmental and climate disasters. And of course we know that developed countries have the highest carbon footprint and own, the corporations that are doing the damage that we see here. I'm from Australia and we have one of the highest carbon footprints in the world. We have a huge amount of mining companies that don't just operate in our own country but elsewhere, so we're one of the main culprits. Of course the US is another big culprit. Okay, now accountability, this is a really very important aspect because at the moment we have governments who appear to think they're accountable to corporations rather than accountable to people. And we have corporations who say that their only accountability is to their shareholders. So we need to change a framework that recognises that when human beings decided they would operate in a form of states, they did so with some kind of agreement that there would be accountability between. And we need to structure that in a way that really gives voice to people who should most have voice, and that's those people who development is supposed to benefit, meaning people at the local level in communities, and particularly women. So we need to have a model that really focuses on the voice of women in their own decision making when development projects are coming into their communities and so forth. And that includes in these big international financial institutions, in the UN, in the kind of structures that the US would like to promote now in free trade agreements, where there's no people's voice. Oh, that's us. Sorry, I should have said that's us at the at the People's General Assembly. We had the People's General Assembly in Foley Park, and we were doing a flash mob. Yeah. Okay, then thinking about that framework, there are foundational principles, and then we try to think of what the goals might be. We call them indicative goals because we still think we need to do more discussions and consultations with our membership, and we don't want to be too tied down to goals. The framework of the foundations is really important, but rather than the goals that we have, we want a goal, for example, to reduce the wealth, resource and power inequalities that currently exist between countries, between rich and poor and between men and women. And we want indicators within there. We also need to look at how these indicators would work, but that would measure how much countries are reducing wealth inequalities and how much they're increasing. They should set targets to honestly try and set them, to reduce or eliminate these inequalities. We want a goal on decent work. So there's a whole, I'm not sure if you've touched on the decent work agenda of the International Labour Organisation. No, okay, so decent work has its own concept, and there are a number of elements to decent work that we won't go through, but one of the areas that we're focusing is on living wage. So I think there's a bit of a discussion in some states in the US at the moment about that as well. What would a living wage actually look like, as opposed to a poverty wage or a starvation rate? And we have some models on how to have a living wage. One of the reasons we think a living wage is also a model for a global framework is so that companies can't jump from one country to another trying to look for the lowest, the most exploitable conditions for workers, which is what they currently do if they're trying to put up the wages out. They're threatened to move to another country. and and they also don't pay tax and so forth, and get deals with their governments if they can jump around. Okay, so that's a crucial part. Then we have, I can't actually, universal public services. So universal education, and we're saying public because we think these things shouldn't be privatised. Education, healthcare, including sexual and reproductive healthcare, water and sanitation and sustainable energy. I have to just say that it's quite hard for people outside of the US to understand the healthcare debate here. That even though in Australia we also have a neoliberal system, we can't understand this discussion about why would somebody not want public health. It's just why people are opposed to public health. It's very, very difficult, even for countries like Thailand, where I live, has a public health system. This is a developing country, and it's decided that it will have a public health system. I work there, so I can go to the hospital under their public health system. Really very difficult to understand how the richest country cannot possibly deliver public health. But anyway, that's a kind of aside to this. And the next part, a goal to create sustainable economies. Okay, and then part of those are around indicators. So that would be about the elimination of corporate subsidies, for progressive tax reform. This is particularly over short-term capital gains. Maybe when you've been talking about macroeconomic policies, you've understood the changes in our economies have moved from what used to be economies based around labour and production to now what's really a huge amount of the economy is now just about speculation and financial services. So that has very dangerous implications, and it has had in Asia in the past, and you can see it now here in the US, what happens when you have a speculative economy. So we really want to try and promote something that's about economies that are where that kind of short-term capital gain is taxed, and also isn't a substantive part of the economy. High income, of course, and wealth, inheritance, these are all things that would be redistributive if they could be taxed. This part means eliminate transfer pricing. That means when companies operate in one country and they do things so that they don't have to pay tax in that country, and they register their companies in other countries where there's tax, they can have tax evasion and things. And so they pretend that the price that they're exporting something for is very low, so that there's no profit registered in that country. So we try and eliminate those kind of things that allow companies to get away with basically paying very, very tiny amounts of tax and no local tax. Okay, goal. Now there's a bit of a discussion about this goal framework that UN Women would like a goal on women's rights, and other groups have also been talking about this. So CWGL and APWLD and some other groups were part of a coalition, post-2015 Women's Coalition, and there's other frameworks that we can all participate in. And we need to, if we're having a goal on women's rights, I think it's really important to say that that will only be effective if other goals also look at gender indicators. And if this whole framework changes, because we can't have a goal for women's rights if simply we still stick with the economic systems we have and so forth, when women are the ones that really most exploited and least benefit from the existing economies. But we do think it's important because, as I said, we can't capture all of the issues just in economic models. So it needs to have indicators around what the levels of violence against women and the existence of policies and legislative frameworks around that, so not just the experience of it. And we think that there could be indicators, for example, around how much spending there is on those kind of areas, on social services and others, but that compared to, say, for example, military spending, which we've chosen that because we think that military spending does itself create an environment which allows for the increase in violence against women, and militarised environments create hostile broader culture as well as the direct impact on women. Okay, this is an environmental goal, so a goal to restate the Earth's ecosystems to sustainable levels. So this would be, about carbon emissions. We should have targets that talk about how much carbon each country uses or how much each person uses and so forth. This, of course, is incredibly contested by the states. And then there's other targets to preserve and restore forests. Some of that's being discussed about deforestation. Should there be a target already? And about the use of chemicals in other areas. We have a concept of food sovereignty, meaning that people should have ownership and control over their own local food production. The next one is a goal to provide the means of implementation and development. And so their targets around global taxes, that this means how do we get the funds, because some countries, of course, when we want universal social protection and others won't have the funds. So that should be funds that we think should have the dual purpose of providing that money and redistributing. So that should come from things that are harmful globally, that's one. So taxes on speculation and arms trade, on shipping, extractive industries and corporates would be a way to get funds for implementation, but also to return some control, what we call fiscal policy space, the tax available to local countries, so that the country itself has, because we have all these free trade agreements and these banks that really try and control how governments can organise their own economies. And then an accountabilities goal, and that should establish new mechanisms, so global mechanisms that actually look at what corporates do and make them accountable. And that would be binding. And we say goals should include disaggregated targets for genuine civic decision making around development. That means, targets that specifically look at how women are involved, for example. Not just involved, but how their decision making is part of the process. Okay, and that's just our last little inspirational quote. So yeah, we really do think that we do have an opportunity now in the world to look at a new course. We think that that's really what I think most of the globe wants. It's just a tiny minority that somehow made the decision that's not what we want. And and we think that we have to, I guess part of what we're doing here is to try and increase the global solidarity for movements that will call for this kind of just environment. So with that, maybe I'll hand over unless you want to stop. No? We can hand over? Okay. And ask some of the participants to be talking about the experiences that they have. So when we asked some people to come here to New York, we thought it was important to have local stories that are telling global problems, basically. Then, so it's not just about their individual issue, but how we're asking people to talk about their situation that's indicative of what's going on in the world. So the first group I'll ask to speak are from Cambodia, and we have 3 people here from Cambodia, Saraom, Nim and Boreng, and Nim in the middle will be speaking about her experience, but this is her first time ever overseas. She doesn't speak English, or she's learning. So I think Saraom is going to help her as she tells you her experience.
Hello.
Hi.
Name comes from Chinese. My name is Chray. I came from Cambodia. Our community is very close to the international airport in Phnom Penh. នាងខ្ញុំមិនដឹងថានាងខ្ញុំជាសកម្មជនការពីសក្តិពីទីទើបតែផ្លាស់ប្ដូរអ្វី
អ្វីៗក៏ផ្លាស់ប្ដូរនៅថ្ងៃទី28 ខែ 7 ឆ្នាំ 2012 អាជ្ញាធរបានជួយលិខិតជំនុំដោយឲ្យពួកយើងរស់រើដំណើរឋានដោយគ្មានសំណង
I have never thought that I became the land activist, but in June 2012, I got the eviction notice from the local authorities to ask us to move away from our house, our community, without compensation offered.
ហើយដីទាំងនោះដែលគេបដិជាពលរដ្ឋចេញហ្នឹងគឺដើម្បីយកពង្រីកលៀនយន្តហោះអន្តរជាតិភ្នំពេញគឺក្រុមហ៊ុនដែលដឹកនាំគឺក្រុមហ៊ុន SCA ជាក្រុមហ៊ុនមួយបារាំង
We heard that they need to extend the airport, and we heard the international companies involved with the development project in extending the airport.
ហើយពួកយើងទិញដីនេះគឺដោយស្របដោយមានរដ្ឋាភិបាលទទួលស្គាល់ព្រមទាំងបោះត្រាវាយត្រាទីផង
Some of us came to settle in our community for a long term, and some come to buy with a recognition from the local authorities with the buying papers and recognized by the local government.
ពួកយើងដោយដឹងថារដ្ឋាភិបាលមិនបានផ្ដល់សំណងសមរម្យយើងបានប្រមូលផ្ដុំគ្នាដើម្បីចេញតវ៉ាតស៊ូមតិនៅមុខពលិញហោះអន្តរជាតិភ្នំពេញ
We disagree to go away, so we mobilize our community's members so that we can fight for our rights, fight for our housing.
ដល់យើងដឹងថាលោកប្រធានសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកឧបមាចុះនៅថ្ងៃទី22 ខែ 11 ឆ្នាំ 2012 បានចុះទៅប្រជុំអាស៊ាននៅកម្ពុជាយើងបានសរសេរ SOS លើដំបូលផ្ទះហើយព្រមទាំងដាក់រូបភាពនៅលើដំបូលផ្ទះដើម្បីឲ្យជាសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកហ្នឹងបានឃើញពីបញ្ហាដែលអាជ្ញាធរបដិញយើងដោយមនោសិទ្ធិយើងឲ្យគាត់ជួយអនុវត្តគុំរបស់ពួកយើង
We go down the street several times, many actions. We went to many places to demand our rights. And one night we heard about Obama came down to Cambodia to join the ASEAN summit in November last year. So we planned on our rooftop before our community close to the airport. We planned SOS and then put Obama photo so that when Obama arrives, he will see from the plan, and then it worked fine. The community worked together, and then we paint on the rooftop.
ហើយមុនពីដីសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកមកដល់ពួកយើងខ្ញុំត្រូវប៉ូលីសចាប់យកទៅឃុំខ្លួនរួចទៅហើយគេបានលុបអក្សរនៅលើដំបូលផ្ទះនោះចេញទៀតហើយមានអ្នកកសែតនៅទាំងនោះបានថតជាសញ្ញាទោះជាប៉ូលីសទាំងនោះចាប់ពួកមានខ្ញុំខុសច្បាប់យ៉ាងណាក៏ខ្ញុំសង្ឃឹមថាសាររបស់ខ្ញុំបានលឺដល់ប្រទេសជិតខាងនៅអន្តរជាតិទីផង
Unfortunately, one day before Barack Obama arrived, we were surrounded by military police, and we were arrested, and we brought to the police, and we were detained over there. But the media coverage our action. They sent out the photo through the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and everything. And we heard that our stories heard to the world, including to the US.
ដល់គេចោទថាពួកខ្ញុំជាអ្នកបង្កបញ្ហាធ្វើឲ្យគ្រោះថ្នាក់ស្នត់សាធារណៈហើយគេបានឃុំឃាំងខ្ញុំនៅបន្ទប់តូចដោយគ្មានឲ្យខ្ញុំហូបអាហារផឹកទឹកឬចុះនិមន្តទឹកទេហើយគេនិយាយថាគ្មានអន្តរជាតិណាជួយទេគឺអ្នកឯងត្រូវជាប់គុកគ្មានថ្ងៃចេញ
So the local authority accused us of being inciting and doing any action which is to not to like to how can I say this order, the public's order, and we were detained inside a small room. We were not allowed to drink, to eat, or even to go to the toilet.
ហើយនេះខ្ញុំក៏បាននិយាយថានេះខ្ញុំអត់មានធ្វើអីខុសច្បាប់ទេអញ្ចឹងសូមឲ្យអស់លោកដែលចេញអ្នកប្រាច្បាប់មកតែខាងក្នុងប្រសិទ្ធអីហ្នឹងខុសច្បាប់សូមឲ្យគាត់ចេញច្បាប់ហ្នឹងមកហើយពួកយើងមិនអាចទទួលស្គាល់យើងនឹងស្រែកទាមទារនៅយុត្តិធម៌ចំពោះអ្វីដែលគាត់បានធ្វើចំពោះយើង
I asked the police about if it is wrong that I just pan on my rooftop SOS and I'm arrested. So if the police can tell us in at least to what law that we have to be detained because we are painting on our rooftop.
ហើយប៉ូលីសទាំងនោះពេលដែលឃុំខ្លួននាងខ្ញុំពួកស្ត្រីទាំងនោះហើយបានឲ្យពួកខ្ញុំហ្នឹងបដិមេដៃនៅនឹងឯកសារដែលគេចាប់ខ្លួននឹងឲ្យយើងបដិមេដៃហើយនាងខ្ញុំបានបដិសេធមិនត្រូវការបដិមេដៃព្រោះខ្ញុំអត់មានកំហុសបើសិនជាខ្ញុំបដិមេដៃលើឯកសារហ្នឹងមានន័យថាខ្ញុំទទួលខ្លួននឹងខុសទទួលខុសគេបានគម្រាមថាបើអ្នកឯងមិនបដិមេដៃទេអ្នកឯងមិនអាចចេញពីទីហ្នឹងអ្នកឯងជាប់គុកហើយខ្ញុំក៏មិនបដិមេដៃខ្ញុំស៊ូជាប់គុកតែខ្ញុំខុសអីព្រោះខ្ញុំធ្វើនេះដើម្បីការពារសិទ្ធិពីខ្ញុំអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំមានអីខុសស្មារតីអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំមិនអាចបដិទេព្រោះអីអាញាធរបើសិនជាបដិមេដៃទៅលើឯកសារអ្វីមួយគេអាចពីពណ៌ថាយើងនឹងយល់ព្រមថាខ្លួនទទួលខុសស្មារតី
So me and other 7 women were detained. The police forced us to confess, to sign and to make a sign printing, to confess that we are doing this action to against national development. And if not, she's going to be in jail forever, or she have to confess and make a thumbprint. But she said she refused to do that because her action was nothing wrong, and she preferred to go to jail if they want to send her to jail.
ខ្ញុំគេថានាងឯងត្រូវតែជាប់គុកមានថ្ងៃចេញទេបើនាងឯងមិនបដិមេដៃអញ្ចឹងនាងឯងគ្មានអ្នកណាជួយនាងឯងបានទេនាងឯងចាំចូលទៅគុកព្រៃសរទៅ
Yeah, they tell us again and again that you will be in jail, no one can help you.
ខ្ញុំប្រកាសថាខ្ញុំគ្មានទៅអីនាងឯងចាប់ខ្ញុំជាអ្នកឯងរំលោភសិទ្ធិរបស់ខ្ញុំនោះវាមានចិត្តជីវិតនិងសិទ្ធិដីផ្ទះស្វ័យខ្ញុំត្រូវទាមទារនៅយុត្តិធម៌
But I told them several times that I will not sign anything. I will not admit anything because I have done anything wrong.
ពួកយើងខ្ញុំជាស្ត្រីច្រើនតែរងគ្រោះដោយសារបញ្ហាអាធររំលោភសិទ្ធិអ្នកស្ត្រីខ្លះដូចជារូបភាពនេះបុរីកីឡាត្រូវលើរដ្ឋាភិបាលរំលោភសិទ្ធិយកដីធ្លីទៀតគាត់បុរីកីឡាបឹងកក់ព្រៃក្រហមសម្បុកចាស់និងគ្រប់ទីកន្លែងទាំងអស់ស្ត្រីខ្លះគាត់ក៏ដល់គាត់មានការជិះចាប់ខ្លាំងគាត់ក៏ទៅអាចទៅសម្លាប់ខ្លួនឯងដោយគាត់មានផ្ទះរស់នៅដោយគាត់អស់សង្ឃឹមក្នុងជីវិត
So in Cambodia, the government they want to grab the land of the community, especially at the urban poor community, urban poor. So they always say that they want to develop, they want to beautify the city. So the poor have to go away, and they say they accuse those poor community of living illegal, occupy the state public land. For example, like this is Borai Kela community. They convince the community that if they agree to give the land to the company, they will build 10 buildings with the 6 stories so that everyone can live together. But after the community agree, they just build the building and then they start to evict people out of the community. They destroy the whole community. So there are a lot of urban poor community in Phnom Penh were evicted without fair compensation or even no compensation at all.
ត្រីមួយចំនួនទៀតគាត់ឈានចេញតវ៉ាត្រូវអាជ្ញាធរវាផ្ទាល់ទៅជារឿងជាប់គុកហើយពួកខ្ញុំជាស្ត្រីដែលចេញតវ៉ាប្រឈមនឹងការអាជ្ញាធរឃ្លាំមើល24ម៉ោងហើយគេអាចសម្រាប់យើងគ្រាន់តែគេនិយាយថាយើងជាគ្រោះថ្នាក់ចៃដន្យតែប៉ុណ្ណោះហើយមានឈ្មោះក្នុងជីស្បែកខ្មៅរបស់គាត់ថា
So it is very difficult for us as a women because we always go down the street, protesting, and have for us to take care of our children. Some of us suicide by killing themselves because they are very, she is very depressed, and for her, they are very, and others community who dare to protest, who dare to speak out. They monitor, they observe very closely by the police, and they threat and they intimidate those people. And you have the experience in Cambodia that if the land activists or the human rights activists die, they always refer to car accident. But actually, they were killed by the local authorities.
ហើយយើងមានជាស្ត្រីត្រូវបាត់បង់ការងារជាច្រើនដូចជាខំពេញតវ៉ាហើយមានគ្រួសារធ្វើមន្ត្រីរាជការគ្រួសារគាត់បញ្ឈប់សកម្មភាពរបស់ខ្ញុំឲ្យខ្ញុំជប់ធ្វើហើយយើងអត់ព្រមឈប់គេក៏ចាក់ចេញពីយើងហើយយើងរាល់ថ្ងៃត្រូវមានថែរក្សាកូនម្នាក់ឯងហើយខ្ញុំសង្ឃឹមថាថ្ងៃណាមួយប្រសិនជារដ្ឋាភិបាលសម្រាប់ខ្ញុំសង្ឃឹមថាមានអង្គការឬអ្នកណាមួយអាចជួយមើលកូនឲ្យ
I'm married with one daughter, and to involve with the action to fight for our housing, my husband was threatened by his commander to stop her from being involved with the action. And then, because she never agreed with her husband had to leave her, and now she is living with her daughter, and she is worried about her daughter.
នៅក្នុងទីកម្ពុជាមានការរំលោភសិទ្ធិជីវរដ្ឋ
So it is a very bad situation in terms of the human rights abuses in Cambodia.
ថាមកគឺជាសោកនាមចំពោះប្រទេសកម្ពុជាពិសេសគឺជាប្រវត្តិទៅបាត់នៅខាងទៅរដ្ឋផ្នែកនៅកម្ពុជា
So a lot of urban poor community in our cities, we were under threat of eviction, and most of us did not receive fair compensation. And the eviction is happening every month, every year.
បើសិនជារដ្ឋាភិបាលនៅតែបន្តក្នុងការអនុវត្តឲ្យក្រុមហ៊ុនធំដែលយកដីជាប្រវត្តិហើយយកការអនុវត្តធ្វើជាលេខចឹងប្រទេសកម្ពុជានឹងជាប្រវត្តិកំពុងប្រឆាំងក្នុងការផ្លាស់ប្ដូររដ្ឋាភិបាលថ្មីប៉ុន្តែការប្រឆាំងនេះត្រូវរដ្ឋាភិបាលគាត់មានអំណាចគាត់បានប្រើវិធានប៉ូលីសបានជាប្រវត្តិដែលប្រឆាំងនឹងតម្លាក់បោះចោល
Maybe you're aware about the situation in Cambodia after the national election from 2 years ago. The political issue is very tense now because the Cambodian people doesn't want this government anymore, Hong San government anymore, because we worry that since they has been in power for 30 years already, and our country never progress, never develop, but it's only about the benefit to his family, and people still suffering from his inside his power.
ដូចថ្មីនេះមានបាតកោដែលធ្វើបាតកម្មប្រឆាំងទម្លាក់រដ្ឋាភិបាលចោលត្រូវរងគ្រោះដោយសារស្លាប់ហើយរបួសជាច្រើនហើយបាត់ខ្លួនជាច្រើនទៀតមិនដឹងថានៅទីណា ហើយទីនោះខ្ញុំក៏បានចូលក្នុងរួមសកម្មភាពនឹងដែរ
So now people are down the street and we try to call for justice, fair election, and the government have to be gone, step down, and she become before she came here, she involved with the protest, and we were cracked down by the police very badly. Some of us got seriously injured and some missing.
ខ្ញុំសូមអំពាវនាវអង្គការដែលពាក់ព័ន្ធអង្គការ WLE ហើយអង្គការអស់សូមឲ្យជួយខ្លំមើលតាមដាននៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាផងព្រោះប្រទេសកម្ពុជាកំពុងតែមានការរំលោភសិទ្ធិយ៉ាងធ្ងន់ធ្ងរពីរដ្ឋាភិបាលហើយបំបិទសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពប្រជាពលរដ្ឋមិនឲ្យហ៊ាននិយាយស្ដីពីបញ្ហាដែលប្រឈមនឹងរដ្ឋាភិបាលរំលោភសិទ្ធិគ្រប់បែបយ៉ាងអស់សូមអំពាវនាវសូមឲ្យតាមដានប្រទេសកម្ពុជាផង
I would like to take this opportunity to call for everyone to the world, to NGO like AP, WLD, civil society, many countries, donor to Cambodia, give the money to Cambodia. They should keep an eye on about the development in Cambodia, about our government. We don't want any government like our existing government anymore, and we want the world to support us to get justice.
ខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណទៅអង្គការ WLE ដែលហើយនឹងអង្គការផ្សេងទៀតដែលឲ្យខ្ញុំបានមកប្រទេសសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកពីរដងនេះដែលសម្ដែងពីបញ្ហារបបសិទ្ធិពីប្រទេសកម្ពុជានេះឲ្យអន្តរជាតិហើយនឹងប្រទេសផ្សេងទៀតដឹងពីបញ្ហាប្រទេសកម្ពុជាដែលរដ្ឋាភិបាលរបបសិទ្ធិចឹងខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណ
Many thanks to AP, WLD, and other organization and the university, and you are all here to listen to our program and allow us to come here to tell our real story. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to Nim. I'm sure that everybody can already tell how brave she's been. It's amazing actually in Cambodia that most of the leaders of who are protesting the land rights evictions are women, and women who didn't have political environment to foster their activism in. They've just because of how their responsibility to their community. I'll just very quickly before we move to the next person, I can show a couple of other photos from Cambodia. There's him. Here's one of after the eviction, you can see people still looking for their maybe you can briefly talk about the 15.
Yeah, this is the photo of the other community called Bangkok Lake. The lake the natural lake in our capital used to be a big 133 hectare lake, but the government leased for 99 years to the company to develop, so they clear all the lake. So there's no more green space in our city, and because of the protesting, the 15 women, her college, were arrested and put in jail. And now one of them, Bopha, still in jail because of the actions to protest against the development. So almost every day, every week, they go down the street to protest, to call for justice and release of their friend Bopha. Even children involved with this action to call for their mother's release. So, especially in Cambodia, women are always in the front with the police because they protect their husband. The man that if man go in front of the police, they are easy to attack by the police. And Also, the man cannot control the prison. They will fight back, and then it gets more worse. So every time, police is more than the protesters. Thousands of police. So before in our culture, we believe that man cannot beat woman, and especially police never beat woman. That's why women always on the front. But now they broke the culture. They beat the woman. They hurt the woman.
Okay, and now I think we'll ask our next speaker, Helen Hakena. Helen is from, I don't know if you people are familiar with Bougainville, but Bougainville is a part of Papua New Guinea, although they have their own separate sort of identity and culture. And Helen has been a very an activist and leader of the women's movement in that community for many, many years. And she actually came to New York earlier this year when we went to the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations. And on behalf of the Women Human Rights Defenders International Coalition, she spoke in the UN, and it really had an enormous impact. And in the end, for the first time, the Commission on the Status of Women, they have agreed outcomes, a document that is put out by the governments at the end. And that was the first time they ever used, they included a clause on women human rights defenders, and Helen was the one that had made that presentation, as well as, of course, facing the enormous difficulties in her country, which she'll talk about.
Okay, as you heard, I'm Helen Hakena, come from Bougainville, Papua New Guinea. I will tell you briefly about our struggle. I will begin like 20 years ago, for those who have not heard anything about Bougainville, my island. 20 years ago, a mine was opened in Bougainville, a copper mine, a massive giant open cut mine, one of the world's biggest open cut mine. And the women protested right from the beginning about the mine. They laid in front of bulldozers, nobody listened. The government and the companies would not even take them on to talk about what they wanted. There was no consultation. They let the mine open, and then 20 years later, there was a big fight. There was a conflict between our people, the rebel movement formed, and they fought with the government of Papua New Guinea. We lost 20,000 lives at that time in 1990. 20,000 lives were lost because of the fight. It was just because the government administration, the Australian government and the mining companies didn't want to consult with the people, because by now we could see that there was a lot of environmental damages, there was a lot of loss. People who own the land, particularly women, because we are matrilineal culture, we got only 1% of the profit from the mine, 1%, while the rest of the money went to the mining companies. So there was a huge fight which took 20,000 lives. And then there was a blockade imposed by the Papua New Guinea government. No ships, no planes, no communication with the outside world. We were all alone. During that blockade, lots of women died in childbirth from preventable diseases. Then something changed. Instead of our rebels assisting us, because Papua New Guinea had left, there was fight within our own communities. We didn't trust anyone anymore. There was looting, there was rape of women. That continued for 6 full months in 1990 before the government sent in the army again in 1990. And then gradually we worked for peace. It was the women who worked for peace throughout, because the men were really scared of the army of Papua New Guinea, because if they were in the front, the soldiers would fire. Then the women went into the jungles to persuade their sons or husbands to come, lay down arms and come out for peace negotiations. And the men heard. So they came out in big numbers. Then there was peace. But peace is still very fragile on our island. That war left a lost generation of young people, youth who have not gone to school. Now they are adults, they are illiterate. There's a militarized community now at this stage in Bougainville. And the war had left, and the mining had left, environmental damages. The women cannot work the gardens anymore around the mine sites. Villages were evicted as well. Now they have returned to the mining companies' houses. Now there is talk of reopening the mine. They are again going to be evicted from the mining company houses. So there is lots of talks now, and we are really scared that it might go out of hand again. Okay, at this time in Bougainville, there is talk of reopening the mine again. The women are again not consulted. The women are not again being told what damages will be done, to the environment again. They are not educated about social justice, nothing, environmental damages and anything like that. There's nothing. Only the men are again being consulted. They're sitting on the round tables with the government and with the companies, but not with the women. Okay, we really would like women to participate so that they can make decisions, good decisions about what is happening to their land. And I will tell you something else. A recent research carried out by the UN last year, and which came out this year, it showed that about 68% of the men admitted to raping women, and the government denies that. We have been told that NGOs have lied about that report, but we have not done that report. Our government has said yes about that research, and UNDP went ahead. So 68% of the men admitted to raping women. And there is a lot of gender-based violence on Bougainville at this time. We really would like developments on the island to take into account people, not for profits only, but people should be the center of development on the island. We want people to be consulted. We want people to know what is happening to their land. So these are the things which are happening on Bougainville, which we feel that the world needs to know about. Because on the island, sometimes the media will only go to where they get the money. They will not tell what the people want, what the needs of the people are. So with us participating at this international level, we know that there are other people there, other media, people who have influence that would take up our cause on Bougainville. So for us this year, because of the research, we are planning to hold again the 16 days of activism, which we will call on government and communities to support. We told the government, we have been confronted, and I have been told, to go to the Parliament. So I went to 2 weeks ago before I left, when the report came out, and we went on radio to talk about the report. The government said we NGOs were lying. So I was summoned with my friends to go to the Vice President's office, and we went, and he said, where did you get this figure? But the figure wasn't from us, we told him. You should be happy that we have a baseline data now that the government can use to create programs, more focused programs for young men and, other people in general, but particularly for men and young boys. And he said, no, we did not do that. You are making it look bad for Bougainville in the world. We said, no, it's not about looking good, it's not about looking bad, it's about what we could be doing now. Programs for the future of our nation. So that is what is happening. Anything that comes out, we are summoned to the government, or the police come to us, and anything that we do, we let the police know, and then we hold those protest marches. But even when we don't say that, we don't have the license to protest, even now that we have peace on Bougainville, tension is high. And for us women, we feel that things are not going well, that we are going down the track again, and there may be fights. We feel really insecure about what will happen in the next few months. It's from women, and when women feel insecure, we know that it's not good out there. So these are the things that we have to continue to focus on, to tell communities not to take up arms, particularly now that they are against BCL reopening the mine. We are telling the young men and the women as well, please talk, ask the government so that we can have a dialogue with the government and with the company. You should not be taking up arms again, because what will happen to us again? We have we have lost so many things. We have lost so many people, women as well, we have lost them. So we do not want to run anymore. So it's time to talk, it's not time to fight. So these are the issues that we are still grappling with in Bougainville, lots of them, lots of insecurity. I will talk briefly about the environment. The first, refugees of the climate change, the Chray Islanders, they live about 50 kilometers from my island. The island, the sea has now gone broken the island into two, and there are over 3,000 people there. the old people do not want to be taken to our island on Buka where they will be settled. They say they will go down with the island. These people live on fishing. If they are brought to our island, because on our island we work, we make gardens, we build plantations. They're not used to working. They used to fishing, living off their coconut trees, but now they can't do that. The first lot of people, about 700 of them, were moved 2 weeks ago to one part of my island. But we are having problems with landowners who say these people will gradually take over their land. So they do not welcome them very, very well. Even though the government has paid for that land, the landowners of that land, they do not want that. So these people are, like, they feel really insecure because they leave their home where they feel secure in, the environment they know, and they come up to a new place where it's so different from them. So most of their children and their women have not gone to school. Most of them, they don't even have anything, when they have their monthly or their menstruation. There is nowhere where they can get napkins, sanitary napkins from, because ships only go once or twice a year to the islands. And even for my island too, which is big, we only see ships once a month or none at all. And we don't have the resources we need. Once we're on the mainland of Papua New Guinea, we get whatever we want to take home, because ships are not reliable. It's because in January of last year, 2 ships, because we are islanders and we depend on ships to go between islands, there was a ship that sank off the coast of Morobe province in Papua New Guinea, killing over 300 passengers, most of them from our island. So our ex-combatants burned down two of the ships. So now there are no more ships going to the island again, like punishing people for what happened. So my friends, these are lots of things that we need to do. There's still a lot of work to be done, particularly if women are to gain their human rights. We need to continue the struggle of being out there. Even though we risk our lives so much for our women, we still need to continue to do the work, because if we shut our mouth, if we do not do the activism that we do, who else will do it? And another big issue which is coming up in Bougainville, which we have not heard of before, it's the issue of the witches, sorcery-related killings, and they target women. When someone dies in a community and there is no medical certificate, or if she or he goes to the hospital and sent home without a medical certificate, people say they have been killed by the witches. And who are the witches? The women. And early this year, when I left the CSW and went home, 3 sisters were targeted on Bougainville for killing. Someone died in the hospital and was sent home, and the women were chased and they were tortured. One of them was shot with guns and cut with knives, axes, and her community would not even take her side because they were scared. There are so many guns still around which were not collected when the UN collected the guns in Bougainville. There still needs to be total disarmament on the island. So people just watched while she was choked to death. And she was not, even her family was not allowed to take the body home. She was not buried properly. She was just dumped into a pit. Even up to now, her body has not been recovered by her family. And the other 2 women were taken away. Even the police were there, they were unable to help because they were outnumbered by ex-combatants with guns. So all over Papua New Guinea, where I come from, women are targeted for being sorcerers. One has been killed in the highlands, right in front of the town square. She was burned alive. That was early this year, burned alive, and nobody could help. So women are suffering multiple bases of violence, all forms of violence. And because women are harmless, they cannot support and they cannot protect themselves, they are targeted even more. So in Bougainville, we have lost 40 people, suspected of sorcery-related, deaths, killing, and just 2 weeks ago, a family was shot to death, father, mother, and the son. They were suspected of doing witchcraft on someone who died in the village. And just before I left last week, 9 women were almost killed because they were again suspected of killing, doing witchcraft on a man who died in the village, and 9 of them were saved just because my son called and we had to go and intervene. So all these things that women, that you do not hear here, is happening out there in the world. So this is what we want the world to know, so justice is done to these women, and that there are laws created to protect women. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Helen. And I think one of the things about this sorcery-related killings, often women who speak out are also targeted,
Yes.
because that's not seen to be, that's seen to be.
Yeah.
And so the woman that you mentioned was actually from your network.
Yeah, from the network of human rights defenders. So when we speak out, even when we were advocating and lobbying for her release, there were men out there who were with guns who were targeting us, and we had informants who came and said there are people there, so get out of here quickly. So the human rights defenders are targeted. So when we try to intervene, our whole families are targeted as well. We risk our lives in helping other women and communities for doing that.
Okay, and so our last speaker is going to be Annie Lestari, and Annie is also here as well as for our delegation and being part of the People's General Assembly, the UN General Assembly, and she's also staying for the UN has a high-level dialogue on migration and development, and Annie has been as both a migrant worker herself, but also a leader in the migrants movement, particularly in our region, but internationally as well. So,
yeah, thank you. My name is Annie. I'm from Indonesia. Have you heard? A country, okay. So I would like to share my story as one of this example of how the impact of failure development to countries like Indonesia, and how also the idea of development using the cheap labor, one of them is actually migrant labor, has impacted a lot of life, especially the life of the woman. My country is not poor. We have now 250 million people. We are the third largest after China, India, and Indonesia. And we are full of natural resources. We have a lot of human resources. Ideally, it's supposed to be sufficient to develop a nation that really feed and provide their basic needs for their own people. But after the coup against our president in 1965, then suddenly our country was transformed into a very modern country with full of factories everywhere, offices, import-export of things without us knowing what this is about. The only thing that we always were told is actually this is a development, this is how you should actually develop yourself. And we were actually trained to be so-called educated, and then after that, after high school, many of us actually just go to the work. When I was very small, I also wished to be one of educated person, and my family always wanted the 3 children going to the school in the college so we can have a better job in the market. But because of the Asian crisis in 1997, things actually crashed, the whole economic collapse. My mom was actually a small trader in small market, has to struggle with suddenly falling prices and high inflation everywhere. And she has no means anymore to bring me as the eldest to the college, and I had to decide what to do, and I decided to work. But even working within the country is not an option for better living, because wage of the workers is so small by that time. It's just enough to sustain yourself in a month, and you will not be able to save at all. So I decided to be migrant workers, and the only chance as for women is really a domestic worker. In Asia, that is the biggest number for migrant workers. So I flew to Hong Kong, and I was brought by recruitment agency, because in Asia particularly, a lot of the policy to labor migration is using a private recruitment agency to bring people, especially women, because they do not believe that we can actually protect ourselves, and the state actually do not see the role as a protector of their own people once they are leaving the country. So the agency was the one telling me what to do, how much I should receive, and what would be my rights, without me knowing that there is such thing as a labor employment standard in Hong Kong, that domestic worker has entitlements such as a weekly holiday, minimum wage, and others. But at that time I was actually underpaid. I only received like 50% of my income, something like 200 US a month, where the minimum wage is like 400 US a month, and no holiday. And then after 5 months, where my wage was deducted for the agency fee, because they say we owe them a lot of money to come to Hong Kong. I was actually trained in the camp for 5 months, learning all these Chinese things. And they told me I owe them a lot of money, which is like 3,000 US just to be able to work. At that time was a lot of money in 1999. So then they took away all my income 100%. I didn't have it for 5 months, and then after 5 months I have to negotiate my holiday, and my employer said you only have once my holiday. So that I used that only one holiday to meet my friends, and I started searching for help, because I feel my situation was not very alright, and because I didn't know a lot of groups there, and all of them speaking Chinese. And there were not many NGOs or even organizations exist as today to help the migrant workers. So it was very isolated situation. So after 2 months, I was able to get a number where I can get help, and I think I feel lucky because I spoke English, so I can talk to them, because many of them are not really from Indonesia speaking my language. So since then I ran away after 7 months. I cannot take it anymore. I had like $15 US in my pocket just to help myself. And I stayed in the shelter for 5 months. And one of the regulation in Asia, this is actually throughout the region, once you are actually terminating your contract and you have your ongoing cases, you are not allowed to work legally. So you have to be like sheltered and supported by NGO or charity, otherwise you will be undocumented there. So I was not allowed to work, and I used that to learn a lot of knowledge about the migrants' life. And that's where I actually engaged with the movement. I saw my fellow Filipinos, Nepalese, Sri Lankan, and then Thailand, who actually well organized. They were very active. All of them were women, something like 98% of them. And in Hong Kong, we have like 300,000 domestic workers coming from 5 countries or 6. Now we have Bangladeshi domestic workers. Indonesia is the second largest after Filipino. So I was so inspired, and then from that I formed my own group. We call it the Association of Indonesian Migrant Workers, and we also link up with the network of different nationalities domestic workers. We call it the Asian Migrants Coordinating Body. So since then I was kind of engaged with the global movement of migrants, and now what I would like to share with you is how we view the international migration. I do not value my experience as domestic worker. I never wish anyone to have suffered like me anymore, not my siblings, not anyone else, because it was unpleasant experience. And I believe if you talk to migrants community, even the US, many of them will also share very sad experience as a migrant's life, because first and foremost, what we view is there is no one in this world should be forced of leaving their hometown just for the sake of survival. Everyone has a right to their own resources and decent living, and but unless that is being established within their own hometown, then you expect more and more women or more and more people leaving their hometown. That's what happened now. The international migration become global phenomenon. We have like 250 million, and then 50% of them are women, and then 15% of them is undocumented migrants across the globe. And US and Europe actually host the biggest number of undocumented migrants. So the economy in many countries actually rely to cheap labor, and this cheap labor, actually migrant workers, the pay that we have is only like 1/3 or even half of the pay received by the local worker. And because of that, a lot of multi-corporations who invest money in Asia, in the US, or even in some country in Latin America, they like to import migrant workers because they can be a source of skillful, very professional labor with less rights, from the wages, from the allowances, or even from right to stay. So, and that's the reason why a lot of like rumor going around that migrant workers stealing the job of the local. We actually pitted against each other, and even in Hong Kong, we face a lot of discrimination. We have to explain to the local friends and community we are not here to steal anyone's job, because the job that we do is none of these people want to do it. A domestic worker job. There is no people in that country who are somehow well enough to want to be asked 24 hours domestic care in the house. And then secondly, we also have to explain to them that we are here because we are also exploited, not because we love to be here. So we have to establish that kind of connection, because there are a lot of, with this kind of global crisis, the government, even the corporation, needs someone to be blamed. And the easiest target is really migrants, because we are a silent community. We are hidden, invisible community. No one knows who we are, except maybe when you see them on the street selling things. That's where you see migrants. But how their life is, no one knows. And also, another issue is that now with the so-called development agenda under the neoliberal framework, they are actually promoting the use of the remittances of migrants to subsidize the development in our countries. Because like me, I subsidize poor people in my hometown, my sibling and also my parent. And it's supposed to be a responsibility of the state, but because they don't do it, it's me who actually subsidize their living. And for them to live decently, I have to be migrant workers my whole life, perhaps. And if I go home, someone from my family has to go. So someone will subsidize our living. So this kind of phenomenon has been ongoing and continue to be practiced, because there is no such improvement within our hometown. And we believe if there is no improvement, then you cannot really talk about human life and decent living. And then now with this global crisis, there is ongoing debate how they actually want to frame the international migration, so it will be good for the new development including the MDG. And one of them is sadly enough to say many of the countries who are actually having a lot of programs, for example in Australia, in New Zealand, where they have the seasonal workers, they have been proposing to actually want to import seasonal workers, where they will only allow them to stay for 6 months, and they have to go home and they have to come back every 6 months. And this is new type of migration today: skill but temporary stay and no rights except your 6 months income, and that's all. So this is new paradigm. Our contract is getting shorter, our wage is getting lower. We are expected to perform multitasking but less pay and less rights, or even no rights. And another issue that has been in the ongoing debate is also immigration policies. We know by fact that migrant workers have very temporary visa. In Hong Kong, where I'm staying, under the Constitution, there is no such thing as domestic worker or foreign. Under the Constitution, all foreigners can apply to be the permanent resident of that place after 7 years. But sadly enough, the immigration get another policy where they accept domestic worker, refugee, prisoner, and also student not to be included in this equal rights. And that become a big problem, because we are composed by 3% of the workforce in Hong Kong, and yet we are not being recognized. And then forever, you stay there for 20 years, you are just a domestic worker. There is no way for you to even change to another type of job. That's where actually I'm having problem, because I've been there for 14 years, and there is no way for me to do other thing except domestic work. So, and they become very strict, like if you don't live with your employer, you will be arrested. If you live out, you are arrested. And recently we have 2 arrests already by the immigration, where 14 Filipinos were arrested and deported at once because they live together in the same house and they somehow live out. So this kind of practices become one of the new trend now. And common check, for example, on the street, they will check your immigration status and you are undocumented, just send you home without your belongings. This kind of things has been one of the impact of the global crisis. Another issue is the recruitment processes. We have been questioning this for a long time. Why the state refused to be responsible on the recruitment process? And simply because the state do not want to put more money into a training system, provide basic knowledge, making sure that you are actually taken care of when you are abroad. And what happened is they just pass it to the recruitment agency, and yet it is not free because I paid 3,000 US just to have that job. And yet when I'm outside and then I have this problem with my employer, I keep calling the agency. The only thing they tell me, just be patient, this is your challenge. After 2 years you have a better job and better pay. But should we wait to die just to get help? And this is kind of common practices, and this is the reason why many migrants, especially domestic workers who don't have day off, like in the Middle East, many of them were killed by their employer, raped without help, and some of them even killed their employer because they do not know what else to do. Every day facing abuse. Recently we have a domestic worker who actually beheaded in the Middle East, and she killed the lady employer because she was actually beaten, not given food and other things. In Hong Kong, where actually this is called international city, recently we had a domestic worker who actually worked for 1 year without holiday, without pay, and she was tied up by the employer in the chair every time, every night. So she cannot even sleep, but she has to sit, and then the employer will tie the hand, tie the legs, and then she was able to escape when the employer tied her up for 5 days when they had holiday in Thailand, and she cannot take it anymore. She tried all her things just to escape, and that's where we actually realized domestic workers, no matter how advanced the country is really the worst, the most vulnerable, because simply we are women. Domestic work is actually women's work, so there is really no need to you have to have a rest and other thing. And then I think lastly that I would like to say, now we are very concerned with how the development has been shaped. As now there is new body outside the UN, we call it Global Forum on Migration Development, GFMD. This was established in 2007, and sadly enough, this was actually recommended by the UN High-Level Dialogue in 2006, and it was part of the output study by the OECD, who said that we need another body outside the UN to manage migration. And then there you go. Since GFMD was established, all the thing about migration is how to use migration for development. And what it means, the one I said, it was remittances, the skill we had for cheap pay, and then our human labor is actually used as really a robot. So the reason why I'm here is also because we want to challenge that notion that we do not want to promote forced migration in the first place. We do not want to promote the use of the cheap and inhuman treatment against migrants as a source of development, because it is not development that we want to see the world should be. We want development that based to human life, community, and we should be in the center of anything, not the 1% wealthiest person in the world. And because of that, we believe that we should do something about this. We actually are a member of the Campaign for People Goals for Sustainable Development, because without the sustainable development, the whole issue of migration cannot be solved. We are just a product of the poverty and unemployment back home, and we are just product of failed development in our hometown. And it's important for all of you to know, and hopefully after you graduate, you can do something also about this. Thank you.
So we've got about, 10 minutes before the end of class. And so we could open it up to a few questions from the students. But what I'd love for you to end with is just to give them suggestions of things they can do living here to be able to help in the struggles that go on. So, but let's see if there are comments. Anybody? Questions, comments? happened. It's a very talkative group of people, and now they've got quiet. Yes.
In Cambodia, I'm curious if the problem with the land rights and the government taking away land is in some way, if it coincides with the increase in tourism.
So the Cambodia cái bộ gọi là lý người ta người Việt quan tâm anh nhận là this is cho tình as about that the nothing is my that for nó vẫn có nhiều
មានការរំសិទ្ធយកដូចនេះគឺមានខាងទេសចរហើយនឹងបាក់ពួកអ្នកមានកម្មអំណាចហើយក្រុមហ៊ុនធំៗមកនៅក្រៅប្រទេសដូចជាវៀតណាមហើយនឹងក្រុមហ៊ុនបារាំងចិនឥណ្ឌូនេស៊ីនិងក្រុមហ៊ុនផ្សេងៗទៀតដែលទៅវិនិយោគទុនរោងចក្រអីដែលខុបខិតជាមួយអាជ្ញាធរថាការអភិវឌ្ឍអ្វីមួយតែតែប្រទេសប្រជាពលរដ្ឋចេញទេសចរ
គេជួយតែតអេកូនេះដែរអេកូទូរីសយល់តែតនឹងគេអភិវឌ្ឍតាមការអភិវឌ្ឍកម្មវិធីចេញមានក្រុមហ៊ុនដែលអភិវឌ្ឍមានប៉ះពាល់ទៅលើតំបន់មួយចំនួនដែរការធ្វើឡើងនៅសហគមន៍ចំនួនគាត់ការពីតំបន់គាត់តំបន់ទេសចរจะធ្វើឡើងនៅសហគមន៍នេះមានអត្ថប្រយោជន៍ជាង
ពួកទេសចរដែលទៅទស្សនកិច្ចនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាគឺមានតាក់ទងនឹងការអភិវឌ្ឍមួយចំនួនដែរនៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាដែលធ្វើឲ្យប៉ះពាល់នឹងប្រជាពលរដ្ឋចឹងពីមក
អញ្ចឹងចុះទៅ
of course there are some communities for example like Bangkok lake the lake used to be the ecology especially for backpacker tourists but now it's no more and there are about 4,200 families used to rely on the tourists. They have the small bar and the guest house, but now it's no more. And also in some of the coastal area, in Pung Sound, in other coastal area, it used to be the community living there for a long time, and now they start to evict those people. In Cambodia, they use the economic land concession for 70 or 90 years or 99 years to the Chinese company, Vietnam, South Korea, Thai. They do that without public consultation with the community about developing, about fair compensation, about the human rights, about doing the environment assessment. No, nothing. Just show the community the eviction notice that I give you 1 week to go. If not, I will destroy everything. That's all.
Do you think that, like with the lake, they're building the apartments and things? Is it for tourists or who would use it?
That target is to reach people from South Korea, from China, Taiwan, Hong Kong. They try to sell this as Taiwan, Hong Kong